Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Happy to have you here today. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. About 20 years ago, I was just thrown directly into the fire with little to no experience. I found myself managing a 20-person crew of fully grown men. We're controlling more than 400 acres of privet along the Duck River in Middle Tennessee. Um, a huge project for someone of my age and experience. And needless to say, I learned a lot there. But most importantly, what I learned was that I was good at this type of work, and I could be successful as a restoration ecologist. So, fast forward back home again in Indiana with Ecologic, I took on all types of different projects for lots of different types of clients. Um, I've seen the worst of the worst and the best of the best. So today I hope to, share some of that knowledge and experience with y'all and empower you to control invasive species, on your own project and establish native plants. So, yeah, with that, I'd just like to talk a little bit about, native plant gardening. I'm at heart a gardener. My grandma taught me to grow vegetables when I was very young. I first learned about native and invasive plants from an educator whose organic garden I was working in. Um, and, you know, my perception after that of the natural world changed dramatically. And at some point, gardening with native plants turns into something bigger. When you can't mulch every space, when you can't pull every weed, the approach needs to be different, right? Um, when you can't plant every plant in exactly the space you want it, you kind of need to ask Mother Nature for some help and then be prepared to give her some help back when your habitats are threatened by invasive species. So um, I'm going to be talking about stuff on a medium to large scale, but many of these concepts will apply to smaller scales as well. So okay, here are some things that I think define what a restoration project is all about, right? It has goals. Um, it attempts to, have a dramatic change, a dramatic transformation on the land with a minimal input. And, we all know the two main processes here. It's almost always includes invasive species control and native plant establishment. Um, so I just want to pause here for a minute to say that, not all circumstances require us to plant anything at all. In fact, some of the most rewarding work is the rejuvenation of an ecosystem by releasing suppressed plant communities from the grips of invasive plants. So, locally here in Bloomington, we might think of Cascades Park, where we're cutting down Asian bush honeysuckle, and we don't have to plant anything, and the native understory just starts coming back. We see wildflowers, we see native shrubs just coming back on their own. Um, or you could think of helping a native seed bank to express itself, right? After removing competing vegetation or halting agricultural practices. I think of bean blossom bottoms locally here. This was an old agricultural area that just couldn't be um, cultivated anymore because it was too wet. It got let go and, preserved by Sycamore Land Trust. And now that natural wetland seed bank that has been there for many years is thriving and expressing itself. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about, releasing native plants. But yeah, other times we need to do some work and introduce those native species. So let me just wrap this here up in a nice little package. Um, Sort of my definition of what is ecological restoration, right? We're assisting damaged ecosystems, we're controlling invasive plants, and we're helping to establish native plant communities on large scales. And we want functional sites that provide maximum benefit and are resilient to change. Here in central Indiana, oftentimes what that looks like is hardwood forest. That means managing for hardwood forest ecosystems. Um, And often, protecting a native tree that is volunteering on your site is one of the most valuable things that you can do for wildlife. Um, so don't forget about the trees, guys. Okay, so preventing reinvasion. This is what we're all here for. This is what we're talking about. Um, the absolute best way to prevent reinvasion by invasive species is to establish a healthy native plant community. So obviously, we're going to have to choose appropriate plants for the site conditions. Um, we're going to have to, if you have a heavy infestation of invasive plants and you don't have that seed bank there, you're going to have to choose tough plants that can compete and will reproduce naturally. Um, Also, don't forget the grasses and sedges because they are a part of that community. We'll talk a lot more about that later because I really love grasses and sedges. So we can start by identifying natives that are already on our site. We can see if we can release these in some way. We can we can identify these plants and they're going to help us choose species for our restoration projects that thrive in the same areas. So yeah, let's pay attention to what's growing naturally on our site. Look those plants up, get to know them. You're going to get a better idea of what kind of soil and moisture levels you're dealing with. Yeah, and learning to identify those volunteer sedges and grasses as well is great because they can be encouraged to spread easily by seed, and they're super valuable for your restoration projects.
No,
Um,
you've got a question from the audience, and they're asking, how do you know if there's a seed bank present? I think a seed bank of native plants present when you're removing the invasives. How do you tell?
that's a good question. It's you can kind of see if bush honeysuckle's been dominating a forest for a long, long time, uh, and you just see bare ground underneath those honeysuckles, it's likely that the seed bank is gone because a lot of seeds won't last in an upland environment for more than maybe 5 years or something. But you also have to think about your surrounding areas too. And, a lot of times, like wildflowers are brought in by ants. So if you have wildflowers on the periphery of your site, that can be, there's still a chance that, that there's uh, that there's natives around you, right? Um, Yeah, the other way to see is just to remove it, honestly, and see what pops up. You know what I mean? Um, and that's a good restoration strategy, really, if you want to remove your invasive plants and kind of see what comes up. That's going to give you an indication of what type of site you're dealing with, and what type of plants are still in the seed bank. Are they any good, or are they just common weeds, right? So yeah, I like to call this slide "Know Thyself" because I'd like everybody to be honest with themselves about their ability to identify native and invasive plants. Um, there is a tendency to want to put lots of different species into a planting, and that can be overwhelming for people who are beginners. So a lot of times what I'll recommend is starting with a base of native grasses and having a few species in there that you know and can identify, so that you just don't get overwhelmed. Uh, you can always add in more plants later through seed or plugs. And like it says here, on smaller sites, consider planting in groups because as plants mature, they should reproduce and spread across the site, go where they want to naturally. But if you've got them planted in a group, it's going to be easy for you to look at that group and say, oh, there's my shorts aster, and here's my beet grass. And it's just a good way to get to know those plants rather than just spreading them all across the site and it becoming random. Um, so continued invasive species control is almost always necessary for these types of projects. Um, so yeah, don't become overwhelmed by planting too many species, but also realize that you may have to use herbicide in the future to control invasive plants in your work area. So um, choosing grasses as a base will help you to use herbicide uh, and not kill everything. We'll talk a little bit about that more later. Um, but yeah, we want to keep that in mind because a lot of times invasive species can't be controlled by simple gardening techniques. We're going to have to use herbicide. I also want to take a moment here to talk about site prep and say that it's almost always necessary for native plant establishment projects. Whether you're planting plugs or sowing seeds, the competing vegetation has to be removed or killed in some way. Oftentimes, large-scale reforestation projects and prairie planting projects are initiated the year after farming ceases because the fields have been harvested, the weeds have been sprayed thoroughly for many years, and you've got sort of a blank canvas there, if you will. Um, and converting a lawn isn't much different. You've got this crop, and you're going to have to kill it off before you plant something else there. Otherwise, your seeds just won't germinate. So, oftentimes, site prep is accomplished most effectively with herbicide. So yeah, just talking about follow-up management activities. Consider how your follow-up management activities will affect the native plants you choose to introduce. So what I'm trying to get across here is that you can spray invasive broadleaf plants with a broadleaf specific herbicide. It doesn't have to kill everything. Here's a picture of some Lespedeza in my prairie, and you can see that it's been sprayed. It's dying. It's on its way out. But none of the grasses that are around that plant are affected by my spray. That's because I've used a broadleaf specific herbicide, triclopyr. Um, and also, if you look closely at this picture, you'll see not only are the grasses and sedges not harmed, but, I was able to kind of direct my spray sort of in a way that saved a lot of these coreopsis and other broadleaf plants too. Just by, being careful about where I was spraying, I was able to really surgically take out this Korean Lespedeza. So yeah, grasses, sedges, and rushes are restoration MVPs. Definitely an integral part of any seed mix. Um, it's going to help you create the kind of community that you're trying to create and that can withstand environmental change. One important thing here for our area, we have so much deer browse. These grasses sort of have a natural deer resistance, if you will, just because of the way they grow. They grow from the ground level, whereas most flowering plants grow from a point along the stem. So when they get munched by a deer, it really kind of hurts them a lot more than if these grasses were just kind of getting grazed. They're sort of adapted to being grazed, right? So yeah, the extensive root systems are great for erosion control, and you know, not only do they provide this competition like a living mulch while they're growing, but once they go dormant for the winter, a lot of times the foliage of grasses and sedges stays around and it acts as sort of a natural mulch for your garden or for your area. I don't use mulch in any of my garden areas because they're completely full of grasses. I don't ever have to mulch. One of the cool things I like to do in my garden beds is plant them really, really thick with grasses, and then sort of let the wildflowers pop up out of those grasses, as they bloom. But then when they stop blooming, they sort of just blend back in with the grass. It's a cool technique for beds. So yeah, also grasses are the fuel for wildfires, you know, um, and that's a critical tool for many ecological restoration projects. And they also support, a wide range of larval hosts. So very important. Here's a couple of Elamus species that are rapidly establishing Um, they dominate early in the restoration project, and they make room for slower growing and longer lived plants. So they're not going to outcompete other natives, but they are going to hold the ground a little bit. Um, these seeds are relatively cheap compared to other native plants. And I've got a couple of websites linked here that I like. One of them is Illinois Wildflowers. The reason I really like this site is because it gives great information on cultivation, range, and habitat. So if you're trying to choose which of these may be the best, um, here's a great site for you. IllinoisWildflowers.info. Yeah. Um, LMS Hystrix, bottlebush grass. That's the one that's in the picture here. This is a highly prized sort of ornamental native that people use in their gardens a lot because of that beautiful seed head. Um, and once again, the cultivation information here on Illinois Wildflowers is really great. It's really great, succinct information for you. Thank you, Ellen, for that link. Um, but yeah, great, succinct information. All right. I'll move on here to another grass, beet grass, Styrhena species. Um, they do best in shady environments and can become a ground cover. Honestly, I've seen this grass in the woods where it is just almost 100% coverage of the forest floor, and it looks beautiful. Um, it's great for stabilizing a slope. These seeds sort of just like fall down the slope and work their way down a slope, and it can happen pretty quickly. Um, does fine in full sun, but also does really well in full shade. So, really adaptable plant here. Here's another really adaptable plant that's commonly used as an ornamental as well. Um, this is naturally found along, riparian environments, rivers, creeks, and stuff. Partial shade, but it will grow in full sun too. Um, and because of this adaptability and its extensive root system, this is a highly prized plant for restoration projects. And it's also a really cool ornamental species to me. Um, I think it makes a really cool seed head. I really enjoy the texture of the foliage, and I really enjoy using this grass in that way that I was talking about earlier to kind of like hide the wildflowers in a bed, but then they pop out when they're blooming and then disappear when they're done. So that's a fun way to use this grass, in a garden bed. Um, so the last seven of these species that we just talked about, the Elamis species, the beetgrass, the river oats, that sort of represents a basic woodland grass restoration seed mix. And because these species are highly adaptable, they can provide benefits as your site matures from open to more shaded and forested. So planting these species as sort of a cover crop, if you will, for tree planting sites has proven to be one of the best strategies for reforestation. All right, so sedges. I got to get at least one sedge in here, and this is one of my favorites, Carex amorii, riverbank tussock sedge. And the reason that I love it is because it is super, super tough. If you have a stormwater application where other plants are getting washed away, this one will not. It will hold the soil. It naturally grows in gravel bars and along the banks of streams, so it's very used to high water flows. Also, it's great for maintenance reduction around the shorelines of ponds and stuff like that because it will just grow so thick you don't have to worry about cattails or something else growing there. It also acts as if you have a lake edge system like that with a lot of roots and foliage there, it's also going to kind of act as a filter to filter the water as it comes into that to that body of water. Okay, so moving on to the showy stuff. Everybody loves flowers, so we'll talk about some of my favorites here. Really, essentially, that's what this is, guys. This is just me talking about my favorite plants. But Rudbeckia lanceolata, cutleaf coneflower. The foliage of this is super cool. It's a really deeply lobed leaf, dark green, and it really looks like no other leaf out there. You notice it right away, and then these flowers are super tall and just popping out at you, beginning at this time of year. Um, and really, this one will proliferate from seed. If you put it on a site and it likes it, it is going to, it's going to reproduce. I have this plant growing in full sun and in almost full shade in medium to wet conditions. So, really, really great coneflower species here. And so, yeah, Monarda fistulosa, bergamot, wild bergamot, or bee balm. Germinates really well from seed and is often used in restoration seed mixes. Um, it's a very common prairie plant, except for in the wettest of soils. So this can be one of those plants that you put it down in your seed mix, like a prairie seed mix, and it just goes nuts. And the whole site, you think the whole site's going to be wild bergamot. But after year two, it sort of starts to fade out a little bit and make room for some of these um, more conservative native plants, your Baptisias, rattlesnake masters, Liatris, stuff like that. So, yeah, it's a great plant for that. It also is like a butterfly magnet. I just see butterflies all over this plant all the time. They love it. And I love seeing this plant planted in mass with, you know, 50 butterflies around. It's awesome. Here's a great one for Monroe County. Especially because, it does really well in limestone soils. So it's one of the more attractive woodland asters. It stays pretty short, can tolerate very dry and rocky soils. I can attest to that here at my house where I've planted it in a garden bed, and after a couple of years, the wind-blown seeds have taken it, pretty far and wide across my property, where that I'm pretty happy about. So yeah, a great one to add into your, woodland restoration or even for a garden bed. Common milkweed. Okay, so yeah, this is sort of like the gateway drug for a lot of us here, uh, and it, it's a good plant because it is highly adaptable, and it's one of those plants that you can teach. It's a teachable thing, right? You can teach. A lot of people have heard about milkweed. We can find the caterpillars, of monarchs on there, and sort of give people an introduction to this world that we're in, and that we love so much. Uh, but yeah, it's easy to collect these seeds. It's easy to germinate these seeds if you give them some room to germinate. If you prep the site, throw them down on the ground, they'll germinate pretty easily. Most people say that this is a deer resistant plant, right? Because it's bitter and all these things. I don't necessarily subscribe to that so much in Monroe County here because our deer are really hungry in town in Bloomington. They will eat common milkweed, but in the larger world, if your deer population isn't so crazy, they will probably avoid this plant. I'm not making any promises if you live in city limits in Bloomington. Uh, so Ohio spiderwort, I love this one because it just germinates really well from seed. It'll bloom the first year you plant it. It'll make a bunch of seeds, and those seeds will all make new plants the next year. Uh, so yeah, are we noticing a theme yet? This is what we want. We want plants that will not only grow well on our site, but reproduce and move across our site. So yeah, all these different types of habitats are listed for this plant. Uh, and uh, and it does well in lots of different situations. That's why I'm including it here. Um, fun fact, fun fact, it is in the day flower family, so those blooms open up in the morning and close by night. It's kind of cool. Um, this plant is a cool season grower, so it'll grow a lot in the spring and bloom. Right now, in the hottest part of the summer, it starts to look a little kind of peaked and sort of ragged, if you will. If this is a plant that you want in your garden, in a smaller setting, you may consider it cutting it back at this time of year so that it'll resprout and grow new luscious foliage for the cool season again in the fall. Yes. Yes, the spiderwort will germinate in just about any crack you give it. Absolutely. Okay, so I have to take a moment and talk about the next sort of level here of the shrub layer, right? This is very important. Shrubs provide structure. They provide their larval hosts, as for Lepidoptera, just like all of our herbaceous plants are. And a lot of them provide other benefits as well, in lots of ways. So spice bush is considered like one of the best replacements for Asian bush honeysuckle. They look similar. They, provide these berries for birds in the fall that are actually much more nutritious than bush honeysuckle. Um, and they're like one of the first plants to bloom in the spring. So if you were walking in the woods in the spring and you sort of see this yellow haze, that's the spice bush. Um, and yeah, I've seen this plant do very well in full sun. I've also seen it do well in full shade. So uh, I think it's a great plant to consider for your, you know, reforestation project or just as a nice shrub in your yard even. Um, and I also wanted to talk about American plum as a shrub. It can be a small tree or a shrub, sort of depending. If you want to grow it in your yard, you can prune it so that it grows like a small tree. Um, but it does have a tendency to form thickets, and this is part of what makes it really valuable for restoration. It's a shrub that's going to hold the creek bank and stabilize it. Um, the blooms are super pretty early in the spring, and I tell you what, if I could bottle this fragrance up and make it like my signature fragrance, I would totally do that because it's the best smell I think I've ever smelled in my life. I love it so much. And yeah, so as a keystone species, it's going to support a wide variety of wildlife on many levels. Keystone species, they have this big effect on stabilizing an ecosystem, even though their numbers might be small. We all know that food webs are reliant on a large population of insects to feed other animals. And because our native plants and insects evolved together, many of those native insects only feed on one species of native plants or plants in one genus. So, yeah, about 96%, this is a good stat, about 96% of our terrestrial birds are reliant on insect species for food. Um, and the plants that provide habitat for those insects are keystone species. Um, just to list a few others here, oaks, the one of the best trees you could plant for wildlife. They support 500 species of Lepidoptera. They provide structure to the forest. They provide homes for many types of birds and mammals and critters. They provide nuts for larger, mammals. Definitely a keystone species, along with cherry and plum, in the genera Prunus. This includes trees like black cherry, as well as the plum that we just talked about. I know a lot of people think of willow trees as weeds, but they are one of the best. hosts for Lepidoptera, supporting over 400 caterpillar species, along with poplar and cottonwoods trees. Again, kind of weedy, fast-growing trees, people think of them as, but just integral for wildlife, a keystone species. Um, Hickory and maples, also great trees that are supporting many species of caterpillar. Talking about some flowering perennials here. Goldenrod supports 71 species of Lepidoptera and 56 species of bees. These numbers are crazy. These are what makes these genera the keystone genera. Sunflowers support 58 species of Lepidoptera, 89 species of bees, asters, 7 different caterpillars, and 43 species of bees rely on asters. Um, the Rudbeckias, 32 species of bee specialists rely on Rudbeckia to get pollen and nectar from. Also some weedy perennials, people think of as weeds, wild grapes. They are larval hosts for 60 different species of Lepidoptera and blackberries, 88 species. I mean, some of these things we think of as weeds are actually the things that are holding our ecosystem together right now. So please don't forget about some of the less sexy native plants out there because they're doing a lot of work. Um, so yeah, with that, I would like to invite you all to our native plant sale where you can purchase a lot of these plants. You can corner me and talk to me about restoration or native plants, uh, and just enjoy that native plant sale and the community we've sort of built up with that. Also, through MC Iris, you could have me come out to your home and perform a free invasive plant survey of your property or your business or church or whatever. So we're happy to help spread this knowledge as MC Iris. And here are a couple of resources out that we have out right now. Details about our native plant sale, our Reduce Invasive Species Challenge, where you can actually get gift certificates to that plant sale for removing invasive species. And if you'd like to join the team, here's a link where you can help volunteer. Okay, yeah, so let's open it up to questions and have a little dialogue here. What can I
Fantastic.
use in a lawn situation after pulling smartweed, quickweed, and creeping Charlie? Well, I would have to ask in this lawn situation, what is your goal for that lawn situation, right? Do you want it to be sort of a garden bed? Are you going to let it grow up into a more naturalized area? Do you want to reforest that area? What's your goal? That's where I always start with people and they want to remove invasive species and they want to plant native. It's like, let's have a goal in mind that's going to help us to uh, to make decisions. Um, I really like the idea of a sedge lawn. It's very doable if you put enough work into it, and if you want to sort of get out there and do a bunch of weeding in your lawn. Yeah, it might be a little much. 2 acres of lawn might be too much for a sedge lawn. Um, yeah. If you're gonna keep mowing it, most native plants will not tolerate, 10 mowings a year. You're not gonna find a lot of native plants that tolerate that. That's kind of why we do have lawns. Um, and lawns do have their place. You have to have a little space to breathe around your home, right? You can't just have everything completely up against you all the time. Um, but I do like the idea of having these edges that are highly native, right? You can still have a lawn, it's okay, but if you make your edges packed full of native plants with many different levels, shrubs, trees, all this, you can still do the work of providing habitat for wildlife and still enjoy your little bit of lawn there in the front. Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah, the one plant I would think of that can handle a lot of trampling and some mowing, and all that is path rush. Juncus tenuis. If you could get a hold of some path rush, that plant will that it has that name for a reason because it's often found in highly compacted paths.
Yeah. And if I can jump in with one other, my favorite native grass lawn alternative that few people talk about is nimblewill. Nimblewill is a wonderful species of Muhlenbergia grass. It's short. When it flowers, it's less than a foot tall. It makes it and it spreads clonally. So much of my yard is nimblewill. I think the big reason why people don't get excited about it is that it does die back in the winter. So then you have a brown lawn in the winter. Aside from that, it's a pretty good option from my perspective, along with the sedges that you're mentioning, Phil.
Awesome. I've never heard of that. That's why I hang out with Ellen, everybody.
Let's see, we got, oh, yeah, Evie, come on over and dig some nimblewill out of my yard. And there are a few places that sell the seeds. I think even Roundstone in Kentucky, just look for nimblewill. It's kind of a distinctive name. Um, let's see. Next question we've got from Whitman. Is there a list somewhere with natural companion plants? Like if I see what's growing well, what natives might I look for to add to it? Ooh, good question.
That is a very good question. And there are certainly lists everywhere of companion plants. Um, one that, what I'd like to recommend though is a book by Mike Hamoya that's sort of particular to our area in southern Indiana here. It's what is it called? Ferns and Wildflowers of Indiana Forests or something by Mike Hamoya. I don't know if we could look that up and put a link to it in the chat, but I mean, that book to me is sort of reads like a coffee table book because you'll open it up and you'll start reading about a plant and it'll sort of describe the ecosystem and describe what other plants you might be seeing in that ecosystem. And I just really love that Mike Moya book. I might take a minute here and try to find a link for the chat if I can. Ellen, did you have any other lists that you might think of companion plants?
Sorry about that. Uh, Unmuting myself. Um, the Illinois Wildflowers site that you mentioned, Phil, has a section that says associates. And I
Yes.
use that sometimes to look
Sure.
at, okay, if I'm looking up cut-leaved coneflower that you talked about, then it'll say, here are the other plants that grow with that. Those are the ones you can choose because you know they're going to thrive with cut-leaf coneflower in that kind of a site.
Great. Thank you, Ellen.
Bet. Thanks everyone for telling me I was muted. Any other questions from the crowd? Feel free to jump on with anything you've been wondering about. One thing I want to just say to Phil is that I appreciate how you emphasize the importance of prepping a site before you plant it, because I've seen um, so many times people put real money out to get native seeds,
Yeah.
and then they just toss it onto grass, live grass, and
Yeah, that's not going to work. It's kind of the same concept that we're talking about here. We establish native plants so that invasive plants don't grow there, right? If you have an invasive plant like lawn grass growing there, it's not going to let native plants germinate. Yeah. To me, it's obvious, but it's not to everybody. You're right, Ellen. Site prep is completely integral to native plant establishment. Absolutely.
well, and you talked about in many cases you use herbicide to achieve that site prep so that the vegetation is dead and the seeds have a chance. If somebody, say, doesn't want to use herbicide, what do you tell them?
Yeah, you can definitely do site prep without herbicide on a small scale. A lot of people will think, well, I'll just till it. That'll work. I'll till it. And that does work. Um, but it also creates a pretty large disturbance in that soil, and it sort of mixes up the soil. It brings up old weed seeds. Why herbicide works so well is because you kill that layer of vegetation and maybe some more seeds germinate. You kill those seeds a second time, and without the soil then being disturbed, it's sort of like those weed seeds that are down a couple inches aren't going to germinate. It's only the stuff on the top of the soil that would germinate. So if you exhaust that weed seed bank with herbicide, um, and don't disturb the soil, you're going to have better luck. So the way that you can do that without herbicide is maybe covering it, right, with mulch or black plastic or something like that, that won't churn up and disturb the soil and just churn up all the old weed seeds that are hiding in there.
Good. Thank you. We've got a question from Amy. What do you recommend for Canada thistle, one of the great invasive nemesis plants?
Yes. So the chemical name is clopyralid. It's sold under many different trade names. Um, but sadly, there's a lot of chemicals that you will spray on Canada thistle that just don't work very well. Um, the absolute best solution, the only way to get rid of Canada thistle is by spraying it with herbicide. I should start by saying that. You can try to dig it out, you can try to solarize it. It won't work. It'll never work. The roots are 12 feet deep. Um, it just won't work. So yeah, your only real option is to spray it with herbicide. The best herbicide is like I said, uh, dang it, Ellen, help me.
Clopyralid or aminopyralid, which is
Yes,
sold under the brand name Milestone.
thank
Both
you.
of those are really effective.
Clopyralid or aminoclopyralid, yes. Also, tank mixing that with triclopyr increases your effectiveness.
Totally. All right. One more. Discuss prepping a shade area. I pulled thick vinca and luckily and nothing until spring. Lots of ephemerals came up. So it seems you have time to see
Absolutely.
what comes up before prepping can help. Oh, I think that's
Absolutely. I,
totally
and and
valid.
and what I think you've done there, Dorothy, is that was your first site prep, honestly. By pulling all the vinca and removing that competing vegetation, that was your very first site prep. And if it only takes you removing the invasive species to release the natives, that that's what we're going for. That's ideal. You know what I mean? So yeah, I would not prep that area with herbicide. If you've pulled the vinca and you see lots of ephemerals coming up, now it's just time to monitor for invasive species. Keep invasive species out and do your thing. Enjoy your garden, you know?
Totally. That's a great answer, Phil. And I'll say that waiting, having that patience to stand back and
Yeah,
wait, sometimes it can be hard, but the alternative is you jump in there with a bag full of mixed seed before you've even seen what's there, and you can end up introducing some new species that have never been found on that site before and that are so aggressive that they outcompete the native seed bank that was there. So having a little patience is really important, I think.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Well, uh, if there are no other questions, I want to thank Phil very much for speaking on this important topic, and very happy that all of you were able to join us. And we hope you can join us at our September 12th plant sale. The QR code is up there on the screen. If you want to go to the website and learn more, there's a species list on the species that we're going to be selling. Really appreciate everyone being with us today. Take care.
Yes, take care, everyone. Thank you very much. See you at the plant sale. Yes, the presentation will be linked somewhere.